I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, October 23rd.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and hit the like and subscribe button. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when we post the videos, typically on Sunday evenings. All right, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. We see a gale producing 33-foot seas in the northeastern Gulf of Alaska, just starting to move out of the Northern California swell window, still focused on the Pacific Northwest, but pretty much too far east to get down into most of Central California and certainly for Southern California. All right, let's move on. We'll start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, and we just barely see it right here. And what a trough does is help support the gale formation. That is, when it dips to the south in the northern hemisphere, it creates a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure. Low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. All right, so the jet is pushing, Japan's right there, off Japan, making it to about the central North Pacific, and then you see the jet splits. And when it splits like that, typically you get high pressure in between, the exact opposite of what happens when you get a trough, and that's not good for surf production. And then the jet does consolidate as it moves over the Gulf of Alaska, producing that tiny little trough, then pushing inland. Also notice there's a trough inland right here. That's creating some precipitation, of course, low pressure, and some snow in the Pacific Northwest and into more the north-central part of the United States. But relative to California, well, not a whole lot going on at the moment. So let's put this into motion, see what's forecast. The trough continues into about Tuesday, the 25th of October, but then you see this big ridge, winds 190, 200 knots, pushing up the Aleutian Islands are right here. If the jet is pushing up north of those and up into the Bering Sea, again, a sign of high pressure and not really supportive of gale development. But by the time we get to Wednesday, October 25th, another trough is forecast building in the Gulf of Alaska, being fed by 140 knot winds, not super strong, but enough to support some gale development. And that trough continues as we get into Thursday, actually being reinforced right there with 180 knot winds briefly on early Friday, and then it too starts fading out. The jet tries to reorganize again, but you have this split pattern over the Kuril Islands here. That does nothing, and we're 180 hours out, pretty much more of the same. The jet not particularly energized due to La Nina, due to the inactive phase of the MJO not allowing energy and warmth and everything that's over here in the West Pacific to get pulled up into the jet and to activate it. So let's go take a look down at the surface. This is surface level pressure, surface level winds. No big surprise, high pressure off California driving northwest winds along the coast. Low pressure up in the Gulf of Alaska producing 35 to 40 knot northwest winds. That should be getting traction on the ocean surface. We know that already. And producing swell, likely radiating to the south. Otherwise, high pressure in control. We get into Monday, and the low pretty much fades out. High pressure, a lobe here, some sort of a cutoff low trying to organize, but just really nothing supportive of gale development. We get into Tuesday, more of the same. Yes, there's low pressure in the Gulf, but all the fetch is aimed off to the northeast. I mean, if you're in Alaska and you're surfing, yes, potential for swell. And then finally, Wednesday, the real trough develops, 45 knot northwest winds, forecast getting traction on the ocean surface, and then working their way across the Gulf into Friday, maybe even some secondary fetch on Friday at 35 knots, and yet another pulse of low pressure energy developing in that trough on Saturday, again with 45 knots. Notice the tropical system over here. We'll believe it when it happens. Of more interest is this gale forecast pushing into the coast with nearly 55-knot winds on Sunday. That's a week out, and then things settle down. We want to see this tropical system get caught by the jet, track over the date line, and turn extratropical, but that's probably way, way too much to ask for. So let's see the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. We're going to go back in time just a little bit to Saturday, yesterday evening. A gale, the same one that's in the Gulf, developed there, producing 21-foot seas, then 26-foot seas, and then 31.7-foot seas. These are the highest seas over this whole domain this morning, Sunday morning, and continuing at about 32 feet as of right now. Then these are all more or less what you call confirmed seas. The next part is the forecast. So here we go into Sunday evening. Of course, not unexpected. The low pretty much out of the California swell window, pushing into Vancouver Island on Monday and vaporizing. And then we get into probably it's about Wednesday. There we go. Some sort of fetch trying to develop. And there it is, 26-foot seas developing Wednesday night, building to 31 feet. 32 feet on Thursday morning, and about in the 32-foot range through Thursday. Fading out, but still a broad area of 20 to 24-foot seas, still circulating or still being produced by latent wind energy in the Gulf of Alaska on Friday. We know there's another pulse coming. Here it comes again, 26-foot seas, building to 32 feet as we get into Sunday. This is almost a week out now, and that fades. And then we think there's yet even another one. And then, of course, the big system over here. Don't believe it. The GFS always grossly overhypes tropical systems with, 49.7-foot seas. We'll believe it when we see it. But not to be left out of the picture, we're going to go take a look at the southern hemisphere, South Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, Ross Ice Shelf, Antarctica down there. There was a gale that developed, this is a week ago, like Friday the 14th of October. See right here, these are, we're not going to get into this too much here, but the Jason 3 altimetry tracks, beam radar down at the ocean surface, you get actual sea heights, measurements. The wave model said 32-foot seas. A average measurement, 15 readings, was about 33.8 feet, with one individual reading to about 38 feet. So maybe the model a little bit undercalled it. Anyway, that low pushed off to the northeast. We got another pass over it on Friday night, the 14th of October, with 33 feet, with run reading to 39 feet. So perhaps the model undercalled it yet again. And then that system started pushing off and was gone after that. Swell from this system is hitting California as we speak and building. It looks like it's bigger than what the models were expecting, and that's not any surprise because the Jason 3 satellite data also suggested that seas were a little bit higher than what the model said. Either way, southern hemi swell, not a bad thing, especially late in October. But in Northern California, there's a good amount of northwest wind swell in the water as well, kind of lumping it up and making things pretty warbly. Protected spots in Southern California maybe will fare a little bit better. So we'll take a look at the wind forecast for California and Hawaii. Not unexpectedly, high pressure in control here, creating strong northwest winds, 20-25 knots along the north and central California coast. Trades about 15 knots pushing into the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Monday, pretty much the same sort of thing, though fetch dying out a little bit along California. And we get into Tuesday, well, a little bit more northwest winds, not as strong, but still 15 knots, junking things up. Trades pretty solid, 15 to 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. And then here we go, Wednesday, another batch of northwest winds. High pressure trying to recede, getting a lot of pressure from, not physical pressure, but sort of figurative pressure from low pressure up in the Gulf of Alaska. And we get into Thursday, still the northwest wind machine in control for California. Trades fading for the Hawaiian Islands at 10 to 15 knots. Friday, finally, California gets a break. Some lighter winds. It almost looks like a front just right up over Cape Mendocino, something like that. And Saturday, again, lighter winds. Take what you can get. And Sunday, let's see, here comes the high pressure again, northwest winds, and the same deal for Hawaii, trades starting to pick up. And Monday looks like much the same. This really is looking like a spring pattern, but we're in the dead of fall when winds should be as light as they possibly could be. And there's a dividing line. You can just about see it somewhere right around between Oregon and North California. All the low pressure, rain, winds from the south are north of that line, and south of there, it's high pressure and nuking northwest winds. Given that, we'll take a look at the rainfall potential for, well, California is what we'd prefer to see, and snow, but we're really going to check out the whole U.S. West Coast, that line we were talking about between Oregon and California, right there. You can see rain on Monday night, making it to Cape Mendocino, instantly vaporizing. Another push on Wednesday makes it right to that line, and it vaporizes. Another system comes in, makes it right to Cape Mendocino, maybe a little bit more into Friday night. Down to Point Arena. Okay, that's good, but likely not even that far. And then it vaporizes, and yet another system for Sunday doing the same thing. So the line, the snow line, the precip line, we'll say is the California-Oregon border. North of there, a good soaking. South of there, bone dry, high pressure, and northwest winds in control. Snow forecast. We're first Palisades, Tahoe. No snow forecast. Freezing level. This is the base of Squaw. This is the top of Squaw. This is pretty normal for this time of year. The reds and grays are non-frozen precipitation or slush. The gray is slush. So if this is the top of Squaw, you see the freezing level well above that, maybe dipping down to mid-mountain about 8,000 feet as we get into the 26th of October, back up, falling again towards the Halloween timeframe, maybe getting down to 7,000 feet, almost to the base, and then way back up to 13, almost 14,000 feet as we get 10 days out on the model. So still not a very supportive pattern, even temperature-wise, for snow. Though this weekend, yesterday, in fact it was this morning, yesterday evening and early this morning, maybe an inch or two of snow was seen on the ground at Squaw and some of the higher elevations in Tahoe. At least it's a start. So let's go look long term. What's the outlook? We're going to look at the Madden Julian Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation. One oscillation affects weather in the Pacific for about 2 months, something like that, 6 weeks to 2 months. The other for 2 or 3 or 4 years. We're going to start by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation. There's 2 phases, active and inactive. The active phase is on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate around the planet, diametrically opposed to each other. The active phase is the one we want. It's effectively a low pressure system. And the MJO rotates around the planet on the equator. So when the and it moves from west to east. So it'd move from over Asia into the West Pacific, and then across the Pacific. Takes about 6 weeks to make that journey. When it's done making its trip across, the inactive phase typically follows behind. The active phase, like I said before, is a low pressure system. When it moves into the West Pacific, it pushes warm, moist air in the West Pacific up high in the atmosphere. That in turn feeds the jet stream, energizes the jet stream. When the jet stream is energized, that feeds storm production, gale production, which then, of course, produces surf, but then also can push the jet deeper into California and produce snow and rainfall, something we desperately need. So the active phase is our friend. The inactive phase of the MJO is effectively high pressure. It steals energy from the jet stream, kind of shuts the storm track down. Not completely. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have surf, you can't have snow and rain during the inactive phase, but the odds tend to not be in its favor. All right, so we're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. This is data from the Tahoe buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. East Pacific here, West Pacific here, 0 is the equator. The area we're interested in is 5 degrees north to 5 degrees south. That's New Guinea there. Oh, and the date line right there. It's just this area in the far west Pacific. That's where all the magic happens. We call it the Kelvin wave generation area. Because when the active phase moves over this area, and if it's strong enough, it can reverse trade winds. That can in turn take warm water that's here, start pushing it off to the east in what's known as a Kelvin wave. If you get successive active phases of the MJO and successive Kelvin waves, well, that transports warm water here into the East Pacific, and when those Kelvin waves erupt off of Ecuador, they start warming surface temperatures there, and that can help usher in El Nino. And of course, El Nino, when it moves into the Pacific, is great for storm and swell production. All right, so we're looking at winds. We want to see winds reversed or weakening. So we just look at the arrows. The longer the arrow, the stronger the winds. Strong easterly trades over the East Pacific, pretty much the same thing over the Central Pacific, pretty much the same thing over the Kelvin wave generation area. But it's not the actual wind speeds, it's the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of the year. And these strong east winds, pretty typical for this time of year. You look at the arrows, they're going nowhere, so normal pattern. Central Pacific, winds a little bit stronger out of the east than normal. And over the Kelvin wave generation area, a little bit stronger than normal, but not too bad. Still, probably indicative of the inactive phase of the MJO. Let's go look a little further out. 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. A good proxy for what's going on at the surface. Is actually up about 4,700 feet. This is the whole planet on one chart. The date line runs right up the middle. The far west Pacific starts about 135 east, so right about there. The blues are easterly anomalies. The reds and oranges, westerly anomalies. So this would be like the active phase of the MJO. This is the inactive phase. This is past performance. Just eyeballing this in the and the date line right there. So the Kelvin wave generation area is in this box here. It actually goes the whole way up the chart, but for the next 7 days, here's the forecast. And you can see today, westerly anomalies trying to nudge, actually making it almost to the date line. It doesn't look very impressive, but given where we've been for the past 2 years, that's pretty good. We actually had another little pulse of this in mid-October, but still, preponderance of easterly anomalies, the inactive phase, the La Nina signal, pretty much in control. But we can guess that maybe the active phase of the MJO is trying to make its way across the Pacific, and will do that at least weekly for the next 3 to 4 days. Then easterly anomalies return. Let's go further out. Outgoing long wave radiation model. This is the statistic model. All right, it's the whole planet. The Pacific Basin is right here. The blues are less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface. The oranges and reds, more sunlight reflectivity. If you have low pressure creates clouds that would prevent sunlight from reflecting off the ocean surface. So one could say this is the active phase of the MJO, and this would be the inactive phase. And of course, the equator, EQ right there, South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea right there, Kelvin wave generation area right there, and of course the Indian Ocean over here. The statistic model suggests the active phase of the MJO in the West Pacific and holding for 5 days, 10 days, even 15 days out. The dynamic model suggests the same thing, but with the active phase even stronger 2 weeks out. This is pretty good news. Phase diagrams, same two models, statistic, dynamic here, but this gives you a little bit more drilled in detail about what's going on. All right, so how do you read this? Well, the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the Maritime Continent, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over North Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is where the active phase is, so right over the West Pacific. The further the dot is away from this circle, the stronger it is. So modest, we'll say. Modest strength, active phase in the West Pacific. That's actually pretty good. We haven't seen something like this in weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, these are 3 different potential forecast tracks. One of them, the CA version of this model, has the active phase pretty much holding in the West Pacific for the next 2 weeks. 2 other versions have it racing off to over North Africa and very weak. Now, the dynamic model here, let me move myself out of the way so you can see, suggests the active phase, about the same deal, moderately strong, and just noodling around in the West Pacific here for the next 2 weeks. So this and the CA branch of the statistic model all are doing what we want it to. And then here's the GFS model. This is zonal wind anomalies, but down even lower, 925 millibars. I think that's up 1,000 feet, something like that. There is Mexico, Central America, hanging there. New Guinea right there. The equator right there. Kelvin wave generation area, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. So draw a box and the date line right there. So in your mind, this area right in here is where we're interested. This is today. The blues are easterly anomalies, so we have light easterly anomalies in control. The oranges, westerly anomalies. So we'll just put this in motion. We see, hey, those westerly anomalies, well, they're holding, but then another bout of easterly anomalies forecast to start Friday, October 28th. So this Friday, they do their thing for a couple of days. They pulse. You can actually see it pulsing here. Then they start weakening again come November 2nd. And then we can go out even further. Westerly anomalies start developing November 3rd. They do their thing for a little bit and actually hold in pretty well. You still have easterly anomalies in the far west Kelvin wave generation area, but over the dateline, things are trying to look good. And then we get out about, where are we, November 8th. And again, do you believe a model 2 weeks out? Certainly the GFS, probably not. But a little bit of a breakup of westerly anomalies. But nonetheless, there are westerly anomalies even on this model. Next up, the upper level model. This goes out to 40 days, all right? It shows areas favorable for precipitation. Those would be the greens, the yellows, dry air, not favorable for precipitation. The Pacific right here, South America, Central America, New Guinea, 0 is the equator, dateline right here. Here's the area we're interested in. And each one of these panels is 5 days, 8 panels going out 40 days. So active phase, wet air over the Kelvin wave generation area today, slowly making its way across the Pacific and dissolving by about November 12th. Inactive phase, dry air of the Kelvin wave, of the MJO sets up about mid-November and continues into the latter part of November, filling the Kelvin wave generation area. And then here's the 1 month CFS model, all right? Whole planet on one chart again, dateline running right up the middle. Kelvin wave generation area, or the far west Pacific, starts at 135 east, so the area we're interested in is right around in here. So you can, and this model, at least the depiction of this model, seems a little bit biased maybe towards the cold side. Anyway, you can see this solid dark line just like that there. That's the active phase. So this would be the active phase of the MJO back in July. The dotted contour in active phase, you can see the regular sort of rhythm of the MJO. Then it sort of fell apart. Today, the weakest of weak active phase over the Kelvin wave generation area with westerly anomalies. You see just starting to make it, according to this, yeah, maybe to about 160 east. Forecast holding for a couple days, backtracking. Now, this model has been we've been scratching our head because it's just showing this persistent easterly wind anomaly pattern. And it's still showing that, but it's showing it weaker than it was last week as we get into mid-November. And it's also showing westerly anomalies making steady progress by mid-November, filling half the Kelvin wave generation area at that time. Maybe not strong, but certainly at least not easterly anomalies. We think that is the beginning of something far more interesting coming up. All right, so now we got a model that goes out 3 months, the CFS model. We're doing something just a little bit different here because we'll see how all this screws together. So past performance is down here. The forecast is up here. The blues, in this case, this is outgoing long wave radiation. That would be the blues are wet air. The yellows are dry air. And you can see, I'm looking around the microphone here. You can see dry air has been in control. Oh, the Pacific starts right about here. And the Kelvin wave generation area goes to here. So that, and just in the past, you can see consistent yellow dry air in control. Now notice this, and you see the wet air here. That's over the maritime continent. But moving forward, wet air, you see it starting to slowly creep in by about mid-November into the Pacific. And then as we get into mid-December, the whole way to the dateline, and then beyond that, almost filling the Pacific while dry air starts building over the maritime continent. This would be the exact opposite of the pattern that we have been in down here, where it's dry air over the Pacific, wet air over the maritime continent. Now we're talking wet air over the Pacific, dry air over the maritime continent. The hint or the suggestion here is that La Nina is getting ready to collapse and something better is to move into the Pacific. Now, we'll go to our regular presentation. We're going to look at 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. The yellows are westerly anomalies, the blues easterly anomalies. Same deal. You see, and again, the dateline Kelvin wave generation area in the past, the action has been easterly anomalies, the blues, easterly anomalies, all filling the Kelvin wave generation area. And then starting today, effectively, westerly anomalies creeping in. They give up ground till about for about 2 weeks. And then westerly anomalies just come in, take over the entire Pacific. And what's even more interesting is easterly anomalies. Look at this line. You can literally see a line running right down there. As the westerly anomalies build into the Pacific, the easterly anomalies build over the maritime continent. This would be a huge thing if it were to happen. And we've been counting down 2 weeks. Today was supposed to be the start. And yeah, we'll say this is the start of the transition, but it's kind of a false start because we've got about another 2 or so weeks to go before things start really digging in earnest. Let's overlay the MJO pattern. All right, so the solid red contour here is the active phase of the MJO. The active phase today, moving over the Kelvin wave generation area. The point being here, look what it does. It doesn't just like race across, it doesn't disappear. It literally sits and lingers over the Pacific, dragging westerly anomalies with it. The inactive phase follows behind, does nothing to alleviate the westerly anomaly pattern, suggesting that something far more, we'll say it good or sinister, depending on how you look at it, is setting up. Then finally, we're going to overlay, and this is the really cool part, the low-pass filter here. All right, the dotted contour is the high-pressure bias. High pressure has been over the Kelvin wave generation area for 2 years. This is basically saying La Nina. As we get into the end around Thanksgiving, it's 2 contours. The first contour collapses. Very quickly after that, a month later, the second contour completely collapses. The low pressure bias, which has been locked over the maritime continent for 2.5 years now, look at this. The leading edge of it easing into the Kelvin wave generation area. And just yesterday, this showed up. Boom. The low pressure bias making it the whole way, to a point south of Hawaii. That, if it happens, and this is 3 months out, I mean, it's quite a reach, but that would suggest a complete collapse of La Nina. Certainly this suggests that, and perhaps a transition to, at a minimum, a neutral state, if not potentially a weak El Nino state. Typically, when you have strong transitions from El Nino to La Nina or vice versa, it happens somewhere in the January, February timeframe. When the transition happens more like in May, June, something like that, then you don't have as much time. This would be the beginning, theoretically, of an El Nino that would build the whole way through the year of 2023, peaking around Christmas time a year later than this. Now, we're not going to go hype all this and say this is going to happen. It's a model 3 months out. But even a hint of it on a model is a very good sign suggesting the demise of La Nina. All right, that's all very exciting. Very, we're in a good place. But let's get ourselves grounded in reality. What is happening right now? And we're going to look down in the ocean, because the ocean, there's a lot of water. It takes a lot of wind to rearrange the water temperature patterns in the Pacific. We're starting subsurface. Data from the Tahoe buoy array again. Those buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. These are the anchor lines on those buoys. This is the East Pacific. This is the West Pacific. The X's are sensors strung along those anchor lines. They get data. You have to use a model to notice there's big gaps between the anchor lines here. And you get a sort of a sense of where is the balance of warm and cold water in the Pacific. During La Nina, all the warm water is over in the far West Pacific. Cold water is in the East Pacific, which is kind of where we are now. We look at these isotherms, they're called, areas of equal temperature. The 28-degree isotherm at 171, I think it was over at 175 East last week, so it's actually losing ground. The 26-degree isotherm, it was somewhere around 150. It's lost maybe a degree or two of distance. And then the 24-degree isotherm, well, holding solid. This is about where it was last week. Maybe even it's gained a little ground to the east. But most of this is just, remember, this is a model. The only hard data of any of this is what's going on in these anchor lines. So a little bit of variation, maybe not unexpected. All right? But it is the anomalies, the differences from normal for this time of the year. The warm water, 2 degrees centigrade above normal. In the far West Pacific, down 150 meters, pretty typical. The dividing line right here at, 155 west. I think it was almost pushing to 150 west last week. And cold water, not nearly as cold according to this. There was down to -2 degrees or even 3 degrees last week. Now it says just 1 degree. But still, this pretty much stratified or non-stratified pattern of warm water in the west, cold water in the east, brick wall in between. Let's go look at another model. The same dynamic here, different source of data. Warm water in the West Pacific, much warmer than what the previous model suggested. Cold water in the east, much colder than what is suggested. The dividing line right about 160. Last week it was 155, something like that. So if anything, easterly anomalies and cold water have maybe surged a little bit in the past week. We don't like that. So then we look at sea height anomalies. This is not temperature data. It looks like it, cold and warm. No, this is the height of the ocean. Satellite data reads and tries to figure out exactly the sphere of the ocean and are there high and low spots in that sphere. Cold water at depth contracts. It'll create a divot on the ocean surface. Warm water at depth expands. It'll create a bump on the ocean surface. And of course, strong easterly anomalies, if they're blowing hard. Oh, and let's get ourselves again. Chile, Peru, Central America, Hawaii, equator, dateline there, New Guinea there. Strong easterly anomalies driven by high pressure will be scooping out water, pushing it this way so you could get these are height 10 centimeters below normal, the -10. And over here, +15, +20, higher than normal anomalies. So trades and cold water in the East Pacific, warm water and higher than normal sea heights in the West Pacific, and the dividing line between the two, and it's only 5 degrees north and south of the equator that matter. It's right here. The dividing line will say about 160 west, so that's what we saw in the other image. Here's a view, sort of puts it all in a time sequence. We're going back a year to October 2021, and here we are, October 2022. West Pacific here, East Pacific here, blues, cold water, reds, oranges, warm water. Last year, this time, very cold water in the East Pacific, La Nina raging. We did get active phase of the MJO in December, created a Kelvin wave, pushed it across, but there was nothing behind it. Cold water redeveloped in the spring. We tried to get another Kelvin wave. It never even made it across the Pacific in June and July. And then cold water reemerged in the July timeframe, about like what it did last year. We're waiting to see some signs of this disappear. We're waiting for a Kelvin wave, something, but as of just the past week, you can actually see cold water expanding off to the west just slightly, and consolidating over this area. Sea surface temperatures. All right. So differences from normal. So sea surface temperature anomalies. Peru down here. Chile, Peru, Central America, California here, Hawaii. It's all the action is on the equator. The equator's right here, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. The Nino 1.2 region, you will get into this in a minute. It's this area right off of Peru going out to, I think it's about 110 or 120 west, right in there. Pretty noisy area. The official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 region, runs from 120 west out to 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. The clear, obvious message is cold water in control in the east, in the west, in the central, and in the west. But we think, and I can't really support this in the moment, that the total volume of cold water in this area maybe not as bad as it was or as strong as it was. That said, there's no real warming occurring either. The 7-day trend, if anything, this is the change in temperature over the past week. The blues, cooling waters. The reds, warming waters. Almost a balance of the two, but I'd say the trend is slightly in favor of cooling the past week. And then the overview picture, this giant, clear, cold water tongue, whatever you want to call it. This is the classic La Nina signal. Still in control. Even if we get the west, and you can see lots of warm water, though, just balled up, waiting here in the West Pacific, waiting for something to change to allow it to start migrating off to the east. And so this cold water, again, does not support evaporation, and it supports high pressure above it. You would have a high pressure system here and a high pressure system here. You can literally see trades raking up the coast and creating this upwelling pattern here. California, fortunately, is not in that situation at the moment. We'll see what happens come spring, but hopefully it will not happen even then. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region is the area right up there on the equator by Ecuador. Today's value, minus 2 degrees, 2.038 degrees. Pretty cold and rock solid, unfortunately. The Nino 3.4 region, latest value, minus 9.08, right there. That's about maybe a little bit of a low point. We've been hovering probably somewhere around the 0.87 range for the past couple of weeks, something like that. Down cooler back in September. Warming slightly, but still nowhere near warm. The cutoff, or the La Nina threshold, is half a degree. When you go below half a degree, you're in La Nina, but you gotta do it for like 5 consecutive 3 months periods. But you can see we're nowhere near half a degree, isn't even on the chart right now. So what does the atmosphere think is going on, right? We have cold water the whole way across the equator. One would think that high pressure is locked stable in the Pacific. We look at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, which is in the Indian Ocean, and Tahiti, which is in the Pacific Ocean. If Tahiti has lower pressure than Darwin, the index will go negative, but today's value clearly positive, 23.59. And just scanning down for the past month, looking at all these values, nary a negative reading to be found. We look at the 30-day average, that sort of gives you, smooths out the curve, plus 20.02, and that's pretty much, if anything, it's going higher, not lower lately. The 90-day average, that's your El Nino, La Nina indicator, plus 15.37, and it too is on the rise. So all this suggests is La Nina, if anything, has built over the past month, not gotten weaker. Here's the 30-day SOI graphed out. You can see the downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO, low pressure. The upward spikes are the inactive phase, high pressure. The zero line is right here. When you're down here like we were back in January 2020, weak El Nino territory. Ever since, we'll say July of 2020, it's been a steady upward push, especially since April 2021. You can draw a line right through it, and it's just been incessantly upwards. But you cannot sit here forever. At some point, the pattern will collapse. So what is the forecast? Sea surface temperature anomaly forecast from the CFS version 2 model for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. All right, so today we're in late October somewhere here. This is raw data from the model. It says temperatures dropping to about 1.25 degrees as we get to, we'll say, mid-November. But then after that, steadily heading upward, almost pushing towards El Nino territory as we get into July. Now, what's the difference from last week? Well, last week, the threshold, 0.5 degree. This is the La Nina threshold. We thought we would be over the threshold in late January, which would be about there. But this week, it looks like it's moved to about the first week in February, something like that. But this is the raw data. PDF corrected version shows temperatures, well, we're falling and going to continue to fall to about 1.05 degrees, which is about where we are, and that's going to be in mid-November. So theoretically, temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region are about as cold as they're going to get. And then again, the upward trend somewhere in, we'll say, the first week of February, transitioning to neutral, and then heading up from there, possibly towards El Nino. So then we look at, that was just one model. We're going to look at every El Nino model there is, both dynamic, all of them here, and statistic. And you can lay them all out in the chart. Dead neutral is right there. This is the, let's see if we can do this, the statistical average, the dynamic average, and then the CPC consolidated, which is halfway in between. The dynamic models suggest and that's 0. So right here would be out of La Nina. And the dynamic models are saying out of La Nina sometime in late December, early January. The statistic models are showing maybe not till mid to late February. The consensus is, well, maybe somewhere in there. So, and we can actually scroll down here and look at the raw data from all these. The dynamic models show transitioning from trying to get above 0.5 degree. That would be, let's see, where are our dates? December, January. So somewhere right around, we'll say mid-January. The statistic models, they show not till a month later, probably not till even beyond that, where was that? Maybe late February. But the average of all the models show the transition roughly right here in the, we'll say, late January, early February time frame, something like that. So we will see. It is not one model suggesting that we're transitioning out of La Nina, though. It is all of them. So for right now, the main focus for the next week is going to be the northern Gulf of Alaska. Hawaii kind of out of the picture. California barely in it, raked by northwest winds. Sort of seems like the inactive phase of the MJO, though the models all say the active phase is building over the West Pacific. If that happens, my guess would be a week, 2 weeks from now, things would start changing and the jet stream would get more energy injected into it and Hawaii would be back in the action. But they've done really well so far this year. California, not so much. It's pretty much high and dry and just minimal swells. Southern hemiswell still hitting for the next couple of days, but that'll be fading out and literally nothing else is forecast down south. Looking out longer term, we're in this critical window now. We are where we said that the beginning of the transition or the demise of La Nina should start happening now. We're seeing still the models are holding more or less, but they've kind of double faked us and said, well, maybe it's 2 weeks out when the real change starts. So another 2 weeks or so, what is it, November 15th, maybe, so that's almost 3 weeks. That's when the real change, marked, obvious changes in westerly wind anomalies in the West Pacific should take shape. So for right now, we're going to keep our eyes on the models very closely, see if that actually materializes or see whether the models start faking out and start slipping out again. If they do that, that would not be good. But assuming they hold as they are now, as we get in again, the late January, early February timeframe, a significant change should happen in the jet stream. The storm track should certainly wake up and theoretically precipitation and snowfall into California with luck. All right, that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any questions, comments, 10 other people are thinking the same thing you are, go ahead and write it up. We'd be happy to reply. Like and subscribe, ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when we post the videos, typically on Sunday evenings. And that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.